You're listening to the Chorus One podcast, a show that covers decentralized networks and their impact on the evolution of automated and borderless economies. On this podcast, we invite pioneers and builders to discuss the decentralized protocols and projects they are working on. On this show today, we have Eric Chen, co-founder and CEO of Injective Protocol. Injective is an EVM-compatible, interoperable, Orderbook-based decentralized exchange that acts as a Layer 2 sidechain built using Tendermint-based consensus. Injective's canary-chain Phase 2 Mainnet recently went live earlier in July, which introduced staking and governance to the network. Injective's governance has already passed the activation of spot market trading and is likely to enable derivative trading soon. We caught up with Eric to discuss Injective's go-to-market strategy, the mechanism for proposing arbitrary markets using governance, how Injective improves price discovery for liquid staking assets, their unique usage of yield boosting for community participation, institutional interests in Injective, and much more.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Chorus One podcast with our hosts Xavier and Felix. Today we're joined by Injective Protocol Eric Chen, who will introduce himself now.
Hey guys, this is Eric Chen, co-founder and CEO of Injective Labs. So we contribute and build Injective Protocol, which is a fully decentralized derivatives exchange protocol that's also a layer one that's bespoke and custom built for DeFi applications.
Wow, yeah, that was already a great intro. Thanks, Eric, and thank you so much for joining us. I think initially to get started, I guess you now already gave like a high-level overview of Injective, but what would be very interesting for our listeners that maybe don't know you, to kind of introduce yourself a little bit, your background, how you got into crypto and how it ended up, like how you ended up founding Injective.
Yeah. So basically, I kind of first started getting into crypto around end of 2017, beginning of 2018 or so. More from a developer's perspective, kind of doing a lot of research on cryptography, because back then there's a lot of debate around the layer one consensus algorithms, and I was mainly looking towards the applications of a lot of more new and novel crypto schemes. And so at the same time, I was also working at a trading firm. So it was a very natural marriage for me to look into something that's in the decentralized exchange space, because it was back then, it was very, very early. So there's a lot of infrastructure issues. There's a lot of room for improvement. So I figured that it was more than natural for me to build Injective. Basically, around, I believe, the October or like August of 2018, and basically start building this infrastructure that's a lot more order book friendly, that has a lot of very novel mechanisms that can scale Ethereum applications.
I could think of no one better to build something like this, I think, with your background. And yeah, what's really interesting, you mentioned at the time there was a lot of different designs going on with these decentralized exchanges, and there's innovation. And probably our listeners are familiar with things like Uniswap. But Injective is a bit different. So you're building, using Tendermint, obviously, and with your background in cryptography, like you mentioned. What reason did you choose to build on, for example, using Tendermint rather than something on an application on Ethereum?
Yeah, so Tendermint generally has that extreme extensibility and kind of flexibility when it comes to customizing a lot of different logic, especially something that are pretty bare bones to the consensus logic. So I think that's definitely the most interesting part, and especially for what we were trying to build, which is kind of like an order book infrastructure. Ethereum simply can't satisfy, or it's economically disincentivized from trying to achieve everything that we're trying to do with the order book model. Namely that even placing order, canceling order, which is kind of bread and butter for any market makers and traders in the space. Every single one of those transactions is comparable, if not more than a standard ERC20 transfer, which is right now looking at 5 to sometimes even $20. So beyond that, just in general, Tendermint just has a very strong, instant finality feature that we want to really, really leverage. Simply because, you don't really run into issues like a long range attack and like stake grinding and stuff like that. So that was kind of like a added benefit for us, because then you can have a finalized state by the end of every single block, and you don't have to worry about whether your order went through when the finality before the finality threshold.
All right, yeah. And you already mentioned, right, like a big thing is that it's Ethereum application. So a big focus of Injective is also this compatibility with Ethereum, or like bridging to Ethereum. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, first of all, like why is it so important to bridge to Ethereum? And then kind of how are you achieving this?
Yeah, so we kind of realized that Ethereum has, generally the biggest network effect. We don't want to kind of build up this network effect ourselves, or bring on the kind of native set of users that are pretty much analogous to crypto in and of itself. So what we decided to do is that we want to attach attach to the Ethereum ecosystem as much as possible to bring over the assets, to bring over the community, because we saw a lot of other layer ones or comparable layer ones trying to bring on users, trying to have them do all the wallet integration, and also have the trader to integrate with the layer one. That's always going to be a very, very big pain point for every single one of the newer layer ones, and it's very, very costly to get all those steps in place. So the design philosophy for building the Injective chain was that we want to make sure that on day one, like an Ethereum user can just onboard to the ecosystem without any type of like experience friction, or any type of change in infrastructure, which is very, very key to us. And yeah, so this is why we built like a fully decentralized bridge that's secured by the validators themselves. And that's a very, very key thing, because there's not a lot of people trying to do that. Most of the people building a bridge is generally POA at this moment. And obviously, we have that EVM compatibility, that EVM layer. So that allows people to deploy, Solidity or like EVM compatible contracts, and just make it easier. So we're just kind of planting a seed for the greater ecosystem adoption for anything that might that might present a very strong synergy with the overall exchange and order book infrastructure.
No, for sure, and completely agree with all of that. And one of the reasons we have you on the show today, which we're personally very excited about at Chorus, and also maybe you can just briefly touch on, is your sort of recent mainnet launch. Sort of interesting. How is the mainnet launch different to what you've already been doing? And also, I believe the network is called a canary-chain. Is there anything you can sort of expand on with that?
Yeah. So basically, right now, we're kind of mapping out this entire launch of the mainnet. So instead of we want instead of just launching the mainnet and just have all the features ready on day one, we want basically to have almost like a accelerated growth of like a baby that eventually with exposure to the outside world and all the Injective communities, to be able to be shaped by the community and rather by the team. Because we observed the launch of Solana, we've observed the launch of Definity and stuff like that. We kind of realized that a lot of these projects, it seems like the team is the strongest influence on where the direction of this ecosystem is going to go, and we don't want to do that. And so basically what we did was that we basically just helped with the candidate chain. So we map out who the Genesis validators are, and from that point on, we want to kind of have like almost like a hands-off approach when it comes to like ideating and innovating on top of us. So this way we kind of planting a seed and setting a good precedent in terms of how the community should engage with the market, and how the community should participate in the overall protocol. So right now, we're still in a very, very early phase of the mainnet. So that means that we want everyone to participate in the protocol by voting on, like what markets they want to launch, proposing as many features as possible, and participating heavily in the governance. And so why do we call the network a canary chain? Because it's a candidate chain. So that means that, we want to make sure that, this is a launch candidate, and rather than, the full on kind of like canonical mainnet, until we're 100% confident that there's no issue with it, and everything running on it is safe. Because another thing we noticed is that a lot of these protocols undergo kind of like a way too aggressive or like way too finalized of a launch, and they run into like block halting issues. They run into so many issues basically during the initial phases and cause like a reorg. So we kind of want to build that reorg into the system and kind of have the community to expect it. Because what we're trying to do here is that basically we want to make sure the mainnet is the start of everything rather than, for a lot of 2018 projects back in the day, it's like the end of everything.
All right. Yeah, that's super interesting. So Injective, it sounds like it has like a extensive governance model too. Can you maybe expand a little bit what this is like done by on-chain voting from INJ holders, I would expect? And can you kind of expand how this governance model works? Maybe like what do you expect users to vote on, or what are the proposal types that users can do?
Yeah, I mean, like, so in terms of proposal, there's like kind of like two ways of proposing. Number one is just using a governance forum, so that's kind of like off chain. So people are just mainly it's just for people to discuss. So we heavily encourage like all the users to even to just create proposals and just create discussions around it. Because while they might not be able to fully comprehend how to convert this into some on-chain action, that's what Injective Lab is for. That we want to help them to kind of like translate that into some on-chain language partially. And on another hand, I think we built an interface that makes it extremely easy to launch spot markets and also like perpetual markets. So basically, we anticipate most of the user action is going to be dominating on that front. But that being said, we want to also encourage people to vote on pretty much all aspects of the governance itself. So that means that like which Oracle module should we work on? What integration should people do? What bridge should people do? Basically, the job of Injective Lab is to service this ecosystem and to basically, hey, like people really want to create this bridge, then we can probably like help them build and help them to propose and vote into governance for the next upgrade.
And I might take it one step back. You mentioned spot and perpetuals. I think one thing that's really interesting that you're doing maybe versus some other standard decentralized exchanges is that you do offer this perpetual, which is, quite interesting because it's mainly spot trading on other sort of, decentralized exchanges we have these days. Maybe it would be interesting for our listeners, I think. So what's the difference between a spot and a perpetual, and why do you think perpetuals might be popular on Injective?
Yeah, I mean, like just in general, Perpetual is kind of like a unique concept that's pretty much native to crypto. There are some kind of like mirrors of it within the traditional finance industry, like CFD, contract for future difference. So Perpetual is pretty much like a mirroring of trying to simulate basically margin trading in the context of kind of like a everlasting futures. So that means that like they have a funding rate, which is trying to simulate the interest rate. They have different elements of futures that are basically being settled around a single index rather than like actually acquiring the inventory. So there's not really like an inventory or like liquidity issue. I think the interesting part about Perpetual is that it's cash settled. So that means that you don't necessarily have to settle on the underlying. You can always settle, utilizing some sort of asset into people's choosing, and this creates such a great flexibility because for example, people can launch different types of futures and different types of perpetuals that are not just native to crypto. They can also launch, for example, commodities and any type of markets that people can acquire a secure index from. The level of flexibility on that, to me, is extremely promising beyond everything else. And on top of that, it's a very, very natural source of leverage, of course, because again, it is a simulation of margin trading with basically not a lot of kind of like a capital inefficiency when it comes to acquiring inventory for margin trading.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned here like you can use like different assets for collateral for these perpetuals. Can you talk a little bit about this collateralization mechanism that Injective has, and maybe what type of assets you would imagine people to collateralize on Injective chain?
Yeah, so it's highly flexible. So that means that you can choose any type of collateral type, long as it's any assets that's being bridged over. So for our case, like since we have that decentralized bridge, any type of ERC20 token can be a collateral for a particular market when you propose. We are working on kind of like multi-collateral system, but this is a little bit down the road, probably for a V2. So once we have like a robust and liquid spot market, a multi-collateral system will be in the works. But right now it's a kind of like a single collateral system. For example, there's hypothetically speaking, someone proposed like a BTC USDT market. So that means that, the index price will be BTC USDT. So then the collateral will be USDT. So you can use, Ethereum USDT that are being bridged over and use that as a collateral. So obviously a lot of people can, go along with 1x leverage, basically mirroring the asset itself, or go leverage. So that means it kind of brings your collateral ratio lower. And obviously, like in terms of what's a dangerous level of collateral, like what's the maximum initial margin, that's up to the market creator to decide. And there's also a liquidation level that's a lot lower than the initial margin. That's basically the dangerous level where you want to make sure that your collateralization is always above that. But yeah, that's kind of like a standard example. The market creation process is highly flexible. So you can totally do like reverse kind of like a coin margin system. You can totally do like a quanto futures and a lot of stuff like that.
Quanto futures, yeah, it sounds like above my pay grade. But so I think basically, what's interesting for us, especially as validators, is that we come across a lot of incentivized testnets, for example, and so these networks trying to incentivize validators basically to join the network. But you've also done the reverse, basically, to incentivize stakers as well. So you've got these almost tranches of yield that stakers can earn. Interested to hear your motivation behind like why you chose this model, and maybe if in the future you will have other sort of novel ways to incentivize staking.
Yeah, I mean the whole point of this is to make sure that everyone tests out the protocol extensively so we can find any faults. So the creative way for us to do it is, through like a yield boosting. So basically, if you perform a certain action, you get a little bit extra yield. So I think that's kind of like a unique incentive mechanism that we kind of like came up with to make sure that people thoroughly participate in the testnet, and for us to help gain, the necessary data and like feedbacks that we need to for the mainnet, basically. So we kind of came up with this mainly for a reason that kind of back in the day, we noticed a lot of protocols in testnet phase, they don't really have a strong incentive system. So really the quote unquote testnet is pretty much participated by a team and a couple of investors. So this is kind of our way to make sure that all community members are participating. We want to make sure that, we want to get the voices that are probably the most as negative as possible, so we can improve the most. Because obviously, the team will know the protocol like end to end, and avoid basically just follow the happy path. Whereas like some person staking into a network who doesn't know anything about the network, they could be extremely annoyed by a certain user experience, or even find a few bugs here and there. That's really what we're trying to test out.
No, for sure. I think it's a good way of going about it. And I think one thing that I came across recently that you might be able to expand upon as well, I mean, you've got some really cool partners, to be honest, and interesting investors as well. But one in particular that stood out for me was, I think they're called SCB10X. It's the sort of commercial bank arm of a Thailand bank, basically. Just interested to hear your thoughts on what this partnership brings to Injective, for example. Are there synergies with TradFi and what you're building with your sort of DEX? What was the vision there?
Yeah. So in terms of like our growth strategy in terms of long run, we always want to make sure that we have kind of like a touch with the institutional space across the world. So SCB like 10X is definitely one of our very first step because they've been very interested in DeFi. They're fairly influential in like Thailand. So it was very natural for us to partner with them to kind of like see how it feels like to work with like a institutional firm, bringing them on board as a validator, and really securing our network to be beyond just more of a broad user base and actually bring on the institutional users. So we're really planting the seed right now, basically creating, like a long-term collaboration on many things that are going to be coming. And beyond that, like kind of opening a door for more conversations, actually public conversations around institutional adoption for the protocol.
Yeah, it does sound a lot like, you have these elements, kind of retail focus, almost like a big community, good UX, incentivizing the staking, and I guess this institutional side. Another one that we have noted here is, of course, Mark Cuban is also invested in Injective, and maybe he described it as a decentralized Robin Hood. Is that like the goal for Injective ultimately, to play on that level? And how do you think also to bring in, like, I guess, right, again, as we said, the Ethereum users hopefully will come, but like, how do we bring in new people into crypto through Injective?
I think the goal as for Injective is to be a really generalized protocol, so people can interpret it, their core features and offerings in different ways. And for, I'm guessing, Mark Cuban's case, he's kind of interpreting it as kind of like a decentralized Robinhood, which makes a lot of sense if there are enough tooling and products that are built on top of Injective that could make it extremely make the broader user, like non-native user, like extremely intuitive and friendly. I mean, that's definitely one of the approaches we want to go eventually. Obviously, like not right now, because we want to focus on the critical amount of liquidity. After all, we are not, like Injective itself is beyond just what some would describe as a decentralized Robinhood. As especially like a exchange, exchange protocol, and like a DeFi protocol, building on top of a blockchain. You're really the clearinghouse, the custodian, the the matching engine, everything all in one, all compressed onto one, like the distributed network or decentralized network. So I think it's one way to describe it on one layer of our product, and I think that's a very exciting layer. But I think Injective is far more than that.
And I want to bring up one of the things that I thought was really cool that you're doing are these decentralized IPO derivatives, or pre-IPO derivatives, I should say. Partnered with Lithium Finance for this. With your financial background, what sort of excites you about things like this being possible in Injective?
Yeah, I think this is kind of like a general, like a bigger thought experiment, where we work with Lithium Finance to like do a lot more thinking around how to price the unpriceable, basically. Like creating a derivative around something that's not actively traded, that doesn't have a constant price index, is always going to be extremely difficult. But what are the mitigation strategies, or like what are the methods we can adopt to create a pricing structure for it? Whether to tinker with the index price itself, whether to tinker with the margin requirement and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, like what Injective did very, very early on is that we have a lot of ideas around creating like a pre-launch token derivatives, basically something that will be traded as a future before launch and as a perpetual post-launch. So we've done a lot of thinking in terms of creating extremely flexible and secure derivatives on kind of like a more of a less frequently traded, or like more exotic markets. And this is one of the directions we want to go for, because a lot of our friends are actually observing the IPO kind of like market, and it's been very, very interesting. And it's actually it's not just like a lot of like OTC activities going on before like IPO, but there's also a lot of negotiations and discussions. I think like if someone can bring that on chain and make that discussion public, that would kind of create a new financial paradigm almost.
Do you think, like, or where do you see this in relation to, let's say, like something like this idea of prediction markets, which seems to be like closely related here? Would you agree there, or do you think that's like a mechanism to maybe also predict other things, or or is it just about like already financial things, or do you really think you can expand this to other decisions or things in the world, and would Injective kind of be interested, or like do you think Injective could be used for that?
I think the overall purpose of a futures market, honestly, is to liquefy the illiquid almost. So, for example, there's a lot of commodity futures, there's a lot of grain futures. You are going to get very poor discovery if you're trying to acquire the inventory in and of itself. Basically, like buying the same coffee bean in New York versus the same coffee bean in Texas have a different acquisition cost, simply because transportation, storage, real estate, and everything related to that. And I think futures is a way to liquefy and equalize the pricing for everything. And I think we're gonna like carry on that thesis for a lot of interesting markets, essentially. And so this is why, right? Like what we're building these like futures protocol, it is almost like attaching to a price, create for like a single event or like for something that's going to happen in the future with like a finalized set of index. So it is in a sense look and feel like a prediction market from time to time, but it definitely isn't. Because it is something that we settle on. There's a final result that you can totally do, and more importantly, like it's a continuous price feed. You're not really predicting a single event. You're more predicting, you're not really predicting anything per se. You're just kind of like working on a less frequent price feed or update.
And I might change the direction just slightly here and bring it a bit more towards the tech again. Yeah, back to sort of your Tendermint and Cosmos SDK, etc. I guess one of the main themes I think with Injective, which is really cool compared to other decentralized exchanges, is interoperability. And with Cosmos now, with IBC enabled, etc. So is that something that Injective will eventually look to be compatible with IBC? What are some of the benefits of being on Cosmos and having IBC versus, say, launching on Ethereum?
Yeah, we're going to be IBC compatible in like probably a couple of weeks or maybe a week. Yeah, I mean, Injective launched with like the Stargate version, so it's pretty natural for us to just enable the IBC feature. There's actually quite a few things that are very interesting about it. Number one is that IBC creates this like arbitrary data transfer across different like IBC compatible chains. So a good example is that, for example, we've been working with Band Protocol and their Oracle integration. The old model would have been relying on like a band relayer to feed in a price feed. And we are working on having that as kind of like a backup setup for Band. But the more interesting part is that Band can literally just IBC over their price feed data to Injective chain, without any type of like relayer necessary like a relayer setup per se. And it doesn't require us to appoint any new relayers that has a sole job of trying to relay Band data over to Injective. So I think generally it makes life a lot easier. For any type of IBC compatible chains, it's basically have a distinct security parameter and yet like a shared economy, which is kind of different from Polkadot because it's kind of like a shared security, somewhat distinct economy.
I think as well that is sort of a bit of a follow on there in terms of exactly IBC enablement, etc. Some of our listeners might know as well as yourself that we're pretty big on liquid staking as well. So a few themes here. With IBC, for example, persistence, maybe with their new liquid staking product, or maybe when you have your bridge from Ethereum, for example, with Lido liquid staking or whatever. Are these sorts of markets that people will be able to trade on Injective, for example, using liquid staking products?
Yeah, that's a go. Basically, like that's one market we really want to build an ecosystem around because I think it's very, very underrepresented within the greater, like centralized exchange and also the DeFi market environment in Ethereum. So yeah, it's one of our main focus from a spot perspective to really bring a lot of attention to these products and kind of be the pioneer when it comes to creating like this venue and this platform for liquid staking tokens and liquid staking products.
All right. I think like one thing that's, super interesting, I guess Injective and maybe like Serum are like the two Orderbook that go still the Orderbook route. It seems like almost everyone in crypto otherwise is like going more and more in this AMM route and like building new versions of that. And of course, Curve V2, Uniswap V3, and Osmosis, who we recently had on, also building new models there. Do you think there's always going to be room for a Orderbook, or if you can like have a scalable enough Orderbook, it's always better than an AMM, or do you think there will be like a coexistence of both, or where do you see Injective standing there?
I think there's a chance for because one trend that you're seeing, especially for like Uniswap V1, V2, and V3, is that they're kind of reincorporating a lot of features from Orderbook model. And that's actually very, very interesting for us to see and see how it evolves over time. Because what we might anticipate is that Orderbook model might implement some features of like an AMM, for example. Instead of like a set price or like a single limit price, it might be a curve price. or it might be like a linear price point for like simplicity's sake. So I think AMM pushes Orderbook model to be to innovate, and Orderbook model pushes AMM to kind of change and be more efficient. So for our case, we've built the Orderbook infrastructure because honestly, it's a lot more difficult. And it's a lot harder to build compared to AMM. So we kind of have this advantage. It's like, hey, there's not going to be that many Orderbook or decentralized Orderbook players in the space. And we also build this EVM layer for people to kind of deploy any AMM model arbitrarily on top of injective chain. So that means that if we want to start off as like an AMM project, we could, and we can totally build this entire thing as an Ethereum native project. But because we have this Orderbook infrastructure, because we have the batch auction model, because we have this type of like exchange mechanism, we are in a lot better competitive space compared to any arbitrary AMM project. Because for our case, if we ever deem AMM to be far superior and amazing, then we can probably spend a couple months and create this product on top of injective chain.
It's definitely a very cool way of looking at it, and yeah, I completely agree that it spurs on innovation from both ends. I might have one final question before we wrap up, Eric. Maybe any future things that you're planning on or excited for with Injective that you can give away in terms of what's your dream for Injective in, let's say, the next 1 year?
Yeah, I mean, like the overarching goal for Injective is to really kind of chip away the market share of like the centralized counterparts. It is kind of ironic to say this because like we all, our biggest investors are the biggest exchanges in the space. But what we really want to do is to kind of like create this almost like a global and like a region and like identity and kind of like I would say language agnostic protocol for any type anything related to DeFi. And so basically we ran into a lot of issues, and we started seeing a lot of issues with regards to financial censorship, especially with regards to the crypto industry. And I think the overall vision for Injective as an ecosystem, as a community, is to create this outlet for people who are kind of turned away from access to different instruments, from censorship in, like, let's say Asia and stuff like that, and to really create this future for kind of like a borderless finance.
Yeah, I think before we wrap up, I wanted to kind of go into a topic. I think we were pretty quick. We covered a lot of things, and I think we have like a little bit of time. And I think one of the core issues, I guess, that's showing up these days in Ethereum, specifically Ethereum DeFi, is this miner extractable value narrative, right? And kind of this idea of being front run. I guess in traditional finance, it's kind of always been happening too, but like now it also came to the crypto world based on like all these different exchanges being there. And I was just gonna like ask maybe, how does Injective view this problem? Do you have any like safeguards in place that maybe kind of defend against this minor extractable value, or how do you see this?
Yeah,
Broadly.
if you read our white paper from like back in 2018, we kind of have this entire crypto primitive for front running, like preventing front running and kind of like creating like this collision resistant exchange order book exchange infrastructure. That was basically how Injective started off. Is that we noticed that there's a lot of minor extractable value. Before, it wasn't really called minor extractable value. It's pretty much just called like front running or like race conditions and stuff like that. That's kind of what we started off as, basically utilizing VDF and creating these like on-chain proofs to make sure that the ordering is fair and is more reflecting of a wall clock time rather than like a auction model for kind of like a slot auction model. But now it's a lot more straightforward, just because we built this entire infrastructure, and we realized that batch auction obviously resolves all the potential front running issues. And especially for the Cosmos native consensus, the auction itself it guarantees inclusion. It doesn't guarantee ordering of the transactions. So yeah, I think it's actually I think it's a non-issue for our chain per se, but definitely it's really concerning for Ethereum, especially as we go on. I wouldn't say it's a big issue per se for people who are trying to trade, but it kind of creates this unhealthy competition for block inclusion or like block ordering that kind of spills over to other usage of Ethereum, which, for example, would be token transfer.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I mean, it sounds though like you still have also the EVM, and it could potentially come if someone deploys like the same smart contracts, say on Ethereum, the same conditions could emerge, right? But yeah,
again, like Cosmos generally deals with inclusion, not necessarily ordering. So ordering is more of it's more of individual discretion almost. So it'll be time discretion. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks. I guess that was like now a little bit super deep, just for finalizing the interview.
Bonus question.
Yeah, exactly. Listeners could already have turned off maybe by now. So overall, thank you so much for coming on again. We really appreciate your time and the stuff that Injective is building, you sharing it. And of course, we as Course One happy to be part of the Injective community. And yeah, maybe to like final words from you. Where can people find out more about Injective? How can they engage in the community?
Yeah, I think I think a very nice first step would be staking.injective.network. That's where most of the governance and staking happens. There's also injectiveprotocol.com and also Injective Labs, our Twitter handle. So I think those are like all the interesting parts for people to start learning more about the Injective ecosystem.
Great, thanks for that. And yeah, thanks again for coming on the show. And yeah, we'll definitely looking forward to seeing what Injective does in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, guys.
Cheers, Eric.